Two questions. How much is Ashwin Sanghi influenced by Dan Brown, and is Ashwin Sanghi India's Dan Brown?
I have been called the Dan Brown of India from the time that my first book, The Roosevelt Line, was written. And I remembered when the first literary review was published of this book, and I was very worried in terms of what the critics were going to say. And one of the very first critics was a very seasoned reviewer from the Hindu, who said that we do a great disservice to Ashwin Sanghi by comparing him to Dan Brown, because there is so much more that I have read in the Roosevelt Line. It has opened up my mind to a new realm of possibilities. Yes, to say that I as an author have not loved reading Dan Brown, that would be a lie. Also, the question that one needs to ask oneself is that, is every sandwich that you eat the same? Because it happens to have two pieces of bread and butter as common ingredients. The way I like to think about it is that an egg mayonnaise sandwich is very, very different to a bacon, lettuce and tomato sandwich. So, very often I think people have a tendency to look at superficialities. That, for example, with the Krishna key, the protagonist of the novel is a historian. Yeah. And Dan Brown always has a symbologist, Robert Langdon. So it's very easy to make that comparison. Yeah. In the Krishna key, there is a female companion who is, sort of along the way, for at least part of the way, along with Robert. So those superficialities tend to be looked at a little more, rather than actually what has been filled inside the sandwich. And that is where I think
that's what happened with Roosevelt Line.
Yes, I think so. So I must tell you, at a personal level, I don't have any issues with the comparison, because it has helped me sell more books. Yeah. I mean, the reality is that Dan Brown is one of the best selling authors in all time. Yeah. So what could be a better comparison? But at the end of the day, I know that's not true, because my writing style is remarkably different.
Correct. When you decided to write Chanakya's chant, there were two characters which were very important, historical characters. There was not much to the imagination, because it is history. Yeah. It wasn't mythology.
Yes.
How did you manage to write that and weave it with the current scenario of the country?
Chanakya's chant, I must tell you, was a much easier book to write than either my first or my third. The reason it was easy is that because a lot has been written by Chanakya. So, for example, we have the Arthashastra, we have the Niti Shastra. Those are works written by Chanakya, but we have very little written about Chanakya. So, we don't have any history books written about Chanakya. The only source that we have on Chanakya's life is the Mudra Rakshas, which is a Sanskrit play written by Vishaka Datta, and that was almost a good 700 years to 900 years after the times of Chanakya. So, it was written as a play. So, again, we are not sure as to how much of it is real and how much of it is fictional. So, that gave me tremendous liberty to be able to play with the Chanakya story. That liberty I never had with the Roosevelt Line or with the Krishna key, because I was dealing with subjects that had been written about many times over. Yeah. So, you had to stick to the straight and narrow with the subjects of Jesus
had that liberty with
or
Chanakya.
Krishna, which that liberty existed with
Chanakya. Because of Chanakya and Krishna, two of the, even if you consider what is written about them is 100% true.
Yes.
And they existed. Yes. Chanakya definitely existed. Krishna also. Two of the greatest political masterminds in this country. Whom would you pick?
I must tell you, based upon today, the situation that I see India in, I would probably like to have a Chanakya on my side. And I probably think that Chanakya would do a better job than Krishna in today's day and age. Just because of the fact that the realpolitik was so strong. In Krishna, there was still an overriding sense of dharma. There was still an overriding sense of noble objective, as it were. I think by the time of Chanakya, a lot of that had already dissipated, and we had already entered into the realm of realpolitik. So probably the sort of ammunition that Chanakya had was very, very different to the sort of ammunition
will
that
be more affordable and useful in
more
today's
appropriate in today's time.
time.
You've put me in a situation actually similar to the Mahabharata, where entire Krishnji's army is put on one side and Krishna is put on the
Seriously,
other.
these are the two greatest
What would you
political
like?
masterminds
What
in
would
this
you
country.
like? But the reality is that I
Reality
think
is,
I would be a Duryodhan and probably at this point of time say, hey, listen, you know, I think I'm okay with Chanakya.
Okay, with Chanakya. Having a family business as big as yours, and from there deciding to write books,
Yeah.
very contradictory.
Yes, very.
Where was that spark?
I was brought up in a typical business family. The only thing that I was taught about books was bookkeeping. That was what I was told. My dad used to say that अगर तुमको कुछ पढ़ने का है, if you need to read something, then read a balance sheet. So that was the extent of my reading.
Yeah.
I was very
वो
lucky.
पढ़ के कहीं पे जाओगे, कहीं पहुंचना है तो वो पढ़ना है.
That's right. And when I was very lucky because my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was not only a businessman but he was also a voracious reader, and he had a huge library of books. So he would send me a book every week, and he would say, "Please read this." And at the end of the week, I had to send him a one-page letter telling him what I liked or I disliked, and that process carried on for more than a year, more than about 12 or 13 years.
Okay.
At the end of that, I had more than 400 books which I had received,
Okay.
ranging from Dickens to Tolstoy to Robert Louis Stevenson, and even mildly erotic works like Fanny Hill and Shatterley's Lover. I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
His reading was very eclectic, and so I had a wonderful variety of stuff to choose from. My mother was also a voracious reader. And she would always have the latest bestseller in her hand.
Okay.
So whether it was an Irving Wallace or a Frederick Forsyth or a Sidney Sheldon or a Jeffrey Archer, whatever happened to be the latest thing. So I had these two people who were continuously giving me books.
But when did you realize that you have that spark in you to be a best?
I had not written anything which was more significant than a couple of pages. I contributed a couple of articles to my school newspaper. I contributed a couple of articles while I was still doing my MBA. When I came back and started working in my family business, a few newspapers told me that, will you write an article for us on the business world or on some economic issue or something, which I did. But none of it excited me. And I was very lucky because in 2003, I visited Srinagar, and which is when I came across the Rosabal Shrine.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I got completely caught up with the fascination for this story. Ended up spending.
That was the spark.
That was the spark. So a lot of people ask me, which is your first love? My first love is the Rosabal line. Because had it not been for that book, I would never have got fascinated enough to be able to actually sit down and write.
But tell me one thing, with the new contemporary Indian writers, you have changed the scenario.
Yeah.
You have given that new dimension to that whole fiction, maybe Chetan, maybe Amish, maybe you, and all three different genres.
Absolutely.
The style is different,
Radically
treatment
different.
is different, everything is different.
Yes.
How do you see at this re-emergence of, will you call it renaissance in Indian literature?
It's actually nothing short of a renaissance.
Nothing short of a renaissance.
It's not nothing short of that,
Yeah.
because I'll tell you why. If you really look at it from the 1950s, I mean, there is only one single event of the 1950s, which is Satyajit Ray producing the Feluda series. But other than that, honestly, for the longest time, it was taken for granted that we Indians are going to write literary fiction.
Yeah.
The concept of us writing commercial fiction didn't exist.
Correct.
And whatever was written, to a very great extent, was written with a very Western voice. Mr. Shashi Tharoor was in Bombay to launch Chanakya's chant, and he said that if you read most of the works prior to Midnight's Children, it would be difficult to tell whether it was an Indian author or a Western author who had written it, because the sensibility was fundamentally a Western sensibility. And I think there we owe a debt of gratitude to Salman Rushdie for having given us a very, very specifically Indian voice to write in. But even post Salman Rushdie, the works that were emerging from us were primarily literary fiction, award-winning stuff, Booker Prize-winning stuff. It was taken for granted that we can't write mysteries, thrillers, adventures, spy thrillers, whodunits, juicy stories. Even for that matter, chicklit or romance, it was taken for granted that these were the domain.
Yeah, we can't have Archers, Matthew Release.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is the huge change that has happened in the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah. It is actually a renaissance.
It is a renaissance where suddenly commercial fiction is being turned out by
And
Indians.
now production houses are trying to create movies
That's right.
on your books.
Absolutely.
How confident you are that such kind of experiment will work in India?
I don't see a reason why it shouldn't, Pramod, because, look at it this way. For the longest time in our country, we had commercial cinema, which was Bollywood, and we had art cinema, which was considered to be a completely separate niche. And it was taken for granted that the two cannot meet. But when you started getting works like, for example, Lagan or Jodha Akbar, you suddenly saw, or for example, in recent times, the movie Kahani, these are, or Wednesday, these are movies which cross the boundaries, where it's very difficult to really pin down that is this a commercial movie or is this a more artistic film. And so that intermingling between those spheres has started happening over the last few years.